A Swift Kick in the Ass, episode 49.
All big changes start with a swift kick in the ass. Join the journey of lifelong friends, John Curren and Tom Stewart, as they make conventional thought bend over and take a boot to the keister. Warning, listeners may notice a force equal to or greater than needed to get your ass moving. A swift kick in the ass. Living life on your terms.
Welcome, I'm Tom Stewart, and I'm joined with my lifelong childhood friend, John Curren. And today we're talking about the 7 deadly sins of personal development. Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks, Tom. You know, like Mark Twain said, there's a charm about the forbidden that makes it unspeakably desirable. I love that quote. For those of us who are not very religious, this is certainly not going to be a religious discussion. We're all entitled to our beliefs. And in fact, I believe that no matter your religion, most of us have common core values, such as being a good person. We're all trying to do that, no matter what our religion is. So, hang on. This isn't going to be about religion, but it is about life. It is about personal change, and how the 7 deadly sins relate to personal development.
All right, John.
So Tom.
Yeah.
I was just going to say we should probably explain to people what the 7 deadly sins are.
Well, the best way I can sum them up is they're transgressions that they're fatal to spiritual progress now, or personal change or personal development. The things that are not necessarily evil in and of themselves, but they can lead to evil things. I explained it to John earlier as it's almost like a gateway drug, so anger can lead to hatred and violence and potentially murder, which is, the number one sin. I don't care what religion or non-religion you are. Murder is a bad thing. And so what these do is it kind of allows you to self-regulate. And what we should talk about is we should at least mention what the 7 deadly sins are. So can I cover that real quick, John?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
All right. We had right off the bat is pride, envy, gluttony, lust, anger, greed, and sloth. Now, the first one that you hear there was pride, right? And John, you're always told that that's a good thing, right? You're supposed to have pride in your country, pride in what you do, pride in your work. So you think, how the hell is pride a sin? Why would they even put that down as a sin? But really, it's an excessive belief in one's own abilities. And, it can also be referred to as vanity. And you've seen that. You've seen people that are full of hubris and, full of themselves and stuck in themselves. And when you get that, you start not listening to people. You start not taking advice. And interestingly enough, they say that pride is actually all the other sins stem from it. Now, from a Catholic view, pride is not good because what was it? Lucifer was the devil, and he was prideful. He was an angel, and he was like, "Look at me, I'm beautiful. I'm great, man. I'm hot crap." So he thought he
wanted to be like God,
right? And so in that way, he kind of like stepped out of his over the line with God. And that's where the whole division of good and evil and so forth came from as far as the biblical perspective.
I think in today's society, we're all guilty of the sin of pride. I mean, and the way I look at it is it's being too self-satisfied, being too satisfied with yourself. Things do not typically go well when you become so overconfident in yourself that, you lose sense of other people out in the world. Everything is self-centered. Look at all the selfies that are out there today. Everyone's taking pictures of themselves saying, "Oh, look how great I am. Look at the things that I'm doing. Isn't it great to be me?" I think that's just rampant within our society today. But, when I think of pride, and I'm very guilty of this. I think a lot about myself, and I have pride in what I've accomplished. And I'm just going to lay it out just right here and right now that, a lot of these sins, I don't necessarily see them as sins. I see it as, as a means of control. And I'll also say that, this is a distinction between right and wrong or good and bad, and what is considered to be proper behavior. I think in some ways pride can be very good. In other ways, it could be very bad. So, this is about, I'm not going to question anyone's beliefs. I certainly have my own belief. But I think each and every one of these sins has some value to it, as well as some very negative value, I guess is what you'd call it. But when I think of pride, I remember this story about my friend Steve. He was in Colorado skiing, and he said he was going down the mountain for the first time that day. It was about 7:00 in the morning, and he's going down this virgin snow. So it's untouched snow, fresh snow, and he's skiing, and he's just hot dogging down the mountain. And he starts, enjoying himself so much, and he carries it to a different level. He starts thinking, I am so great. I am so great. Look at me. I'm so great. And that's when he totally wiped out. he totally lost it. He had too much pride, and life, I think, has a way of paying us back when we go a little bit too far. So it's not good to be too prideful, but certainly I think pride has its place. Like Tom said, pride in your accomplishments, pride in your country, which that's even questionable in this day of age.
I have a really cool quote, and it is related to pride. It says, we can never be gods after all, but we can become something less than human with frightening ease. And it's by N.K. Jemisin, who's the author of The 100,000 Kingdoms. The reason I even say that is I love the 7 deadly sins. Me and John maybe differ, and it's not so much as a religious thing. I really do. I think they're just, I'm intrigued by them. I've always been, and I even started to write a comic book years ago about it, and I made I started it off as a series of blogs, and each character had its own blog. And there was 7 characters in it, and one was Pride. He's eventually, he was the most powerful. He's like a comic book, superhero character. But that was one of the things, because this guy ends up killing like all the other characters, and that was the quote that I used for him, because he had become so powerful that he was trying to become godlike. But it's not related. Yeah,
Yeah, I think we're all interested in these sins. If you look at any type of media, TV shows, movies, even songs, they mention each and every one of these. They've been around for a long time. In fact, I'm not a history buff, but I do know that the 7 deadly sins were first introduced by the Catholic Church, and they were considered to be capital vices or cardinal sins, which basically means that they will lead you directly to hell. And they cut a person from God's graces is the way the Catholic Church interprets it.
And it's interesting to note also that they're not in the Bible. These are not biblical. It's not like you look up the 7 deadly sins in the Bible. So, which a lot of people probably think that they are there, but they're not.
Yeah, and they've been mentioned, but not necessarily called out
as 7 deadly sins. In fact, there was 8 when it first started. The monk in the 4th century that created them had sadness added into it. And later on, he decided, let's cut it down to 7 and make it a little bit more modern for those times. And they combined sadness with sloth. And, it was like if you're depressed, they considered that a sin. So, but we know that's a mental health issue. It's not sinful.
Yeah. Well, I know that there are other sins, and I don't have the same list that you do, Tom. I think it's out of order. But when I think of greed, gluttony, and lust, I think those are some pretty heavy duty things, and that affect people's lives. Lust in particular. I mean, we're all lustful. I mean, I think at times you can't. You're going to experience lust in your life. And what that is, lust is the need to fulfill unspiritual desires. And when I think of lust, I think back about, I guess it's probably 15 years ago or so. And I was in church, and I would see these really hot women in church. This is before I was married. And I was talking to my dad on the phone, and I was saying, Dad, I said, I go to church every Sunday, and I'm really trying to, better myself, and I'm trying to focus on what the priest is saying. But, there are these really hot women in there, and I just, my mind starts to wander. And he just laughed, and he's like, yeah, well, that's why God created hot-looking women. But lust is not just about sexual desires. You can lust after many different things. You can lust after fortune and fame. Again, I don't know how bad some of these things are. I mean, greed, wanting too much of something, does not necessarily need to apply to money. Gluttony is similar to greed, but it's the action of taking too much of something in. So if you've gone to a buffet, a Chinese buffet, you've experienced gluttony. And I love Chinese buffets. I guess it's good to recognize that excess is not going to help within these sins. It's more like moderation, I think.
So, in addition to the 7 deadly sins, we also have 7 capital virtues, which are used. They're tools to be used against these 7 deadly sins. We'll just quickly go through the list. And the first one is chastity, which overcomes the sin of lust. And
like those big chastity belts they used to use in the medieval times when the knights were away. Remember, they would put the belt and the lock thing around the woman's private parts, and you needed a key in order to open it up.
Yeah, sometimes I think chastity might not be by choice. I mean, I guess it worked for me. Chastity sometimes increased my lust because life was not allowing me to act on my lust.
Yeah, I experienced that in basic training. When you're away for 6 weeks from a woman and you have no outlet, you start to get those dreams that you had like you're in high school. Man, your mind just goes crazy.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I don't know how well that works. It may increase the power of the lust, I think, if you're not careful. Generosity counters greed, and I can see this as something that's very good. But I have to wonder, in today's society, money is really looked upon as being an evil thing, and I don't see evil. I don't see money as being evil necessarily. I don't see having lots of money being evil. I actually see jealousness amongst people who don't have money, and they want to take it away from the people who do. I think if you've worked really hard and you've earned a lot of money, I don't see it as a sin to keep, to having that money. I know a lot of people who have money, and they're very generous people. So I don't know how you feel about it, Tom, but I don't necessarily think having money equates to greed. I think greed equates to wanting too much of something. Maybe
right.
Even I guess you can be greedy about money. You can be gluttonous about money, but just having money in itself, I don't think is a
I think we're plagued with technical difficulties tonight because now, it's probably transparent to you guys. All of a sudden, John's voice changed a little bit. John's computer died, and we've been at a loss how we normally record this over Google Hangouts, and nothing seems to be working on. He has a little netbook, so we've switched to a conference line. So John's actually calling in on the phone, and it was working. And now all of a sudden, John was sounding like he was talking underwater. John thinks that it's a divine intervention keeping us from talking about this subject.
Yeah, I was trying to do some research.
I hear you now. I hear you now fine, but that's all that is. So bear with us, and if that happens, we'll just make fun of John as he sounds like he's talking underwater. But go.
Well, how do you know? Maybe I am.
Yeah, maybe.
We're not on YouTube now. It's just solely on the phone, so I could be underwater. Then I think you'd hear the bubbles. Anyhow, it really throws you off your game with all these technical difficulties. We'll try to persevere, though. In fact, I think that's perseverance is a very good character trait, I think, and a lot of these sins, don't mistake them for perseverance. Sloth is one of the 7 deadly sins, and that's being too slow or lazy to do something. But
that's like after you smoke a bunch of weed and you sit around and then you get the munchies, then you go into gluttony, right?
Yeah, but
then you find out someone raided your refrigerator, then it breaks off into anger. And we could probably keep going with this.
Yeah, back when I was in college, it took me about 5.5 years to get through my undergraduate degree. And then it took me about 4 years to get through 2 master's degrees. So I have a lot of years in education. I was being slow. And, I was working through, I have a lot of good reasons why it took me so long to get through. But I was very sloth-like getting through that. But, that's why I don't want people to mistake, slowness as being laziness. That's if you're not doing something or you're doing it so slow, for no good reason, then that could be a concern. But I don't know if some things just aren't on a time schedule, and they're on your own time schedule, and you need to keep working towards that. Wrath, as Tom said, vindictive anger, angry revenge. What about angry sex, revenge sex?
So, that's fallen into lust. So you're merging two, and there's these lines do get blurred between these sins. I mean, they do cross over. Yeah, if someone eats all your Cheetos and you're stoned out of your mind in college, that could be anger, and that might actually lead you to offer one of your roommates beef jerky that isn't really beef jerky, but it's actually a dog treat. That sounds like you're talking from experience.
I don't know what you're talking about, man. Let's see, what else here? Envy, jealousy, wanting to have something else, or wanting to have something that someone else has, longing to possess something. I was envious of people with college degrees when I was going through school. I really wanted to have that advanced education, and I don't. Is that necessarily a bad thing? I think we're all driven by. We have our own motivators, and I think in that case, if you're envious of envious of somebody who has something good, and you're trying to better yourself, is that necessarily a bad thing to want that for yourself?
It could be. It could be a motivator. Just like was it Gordon Gekko? Was it from the Wall Street the movie when Michael Douglas was saying greed is good?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think too, a lot of people, if a lot of people just want to be taken care of and want to profit from the work of others. That's not saying everybody is, and it's not calling out any one group or anything like that. I just think that some people are like that, and I don't think that's fair. And of course, we're not. We shouldn't really put this into religion or politics. So I'll just leave it at that. But I don't know.
I heard this is a great quote, and it's funny because I first thought it was Marilyn Monroe. I just looked down at the quote real quick, and I didn't pay attention until I actually printed it out. And I was looking at it. It was actually Marilyn Manson. I was like, oh my God, I just took a quote from Marilyn Manson. But he says, all 7 deadly sins aren't man's true nature. To be greedy, to be hateful, to have lust. Of course, you have to control them. But if you're made to feel guilty for being human, then what's going to happen is you're going to be trapped in a never-ending sin and repent cycle that you can't escape from. And I think a lot of people have gone through this where they do something and then they feel guilty and, I'll never do that again. Yeah. Whether you say you're on a diet and you eat a cookie or something, you go, no, I'll never do it again. And then you eat another one and you start getting this cycle and you start feeling like really depressed and bad about yourself when sometimes you just have to let go.
Yeah. And then I think that's great that you mentioned that, Tom, because change is not easy. And if you're trying to make long-term change, that just doesn't happen overnight. Tom and I attended a lifestyle design seminar a few months back, and they had a speaker who spoke about long-term change and creating that change. And he said that, the first 30 days of that change, it's tough. And that's going to be a test. And it's going to get easier over time. But between 30 days out and say 90 days out, you might hit a plateau, or you might be tempted to say, "Oh, you know what? I've made such great progress, and I can lower my guard a little bit." And he says that's when most people kind of fall off that wagon of personal change, is because you have to persevere. You have to keep at it. And he said that a year down the road, that's when you can finally say, yes, I have successfully made long-term change. Change is not easy. Change is not easy. Let's see here. One capital virtue that I did not discuss was, meekness, and that's to counter anger. And what I mean by meekness is humbleness, being teachable, or just being quiet and gentle in nature. And, I think about meekness, and it makes me angry.
Why is that?
Well, not the humbleness. I think it's good to be humble, and I think that it's okay to think of yourself and have self-confidence in yourself is one thing, but being humble in all things and not being proud of your accomplishments, being quiet and gentle in nature, to me, I guess that's being quiet and gentle in nature is what I had the most problem with in meekness, is that, sometimes you need to stand up for yourself. You need to be vocal. You need to, get angry and let that out and stand up and hold your ground. I think that's a very good thing, and I think too many people nowadays just, don't take a stand. Again, my friend out in Colorado, I remember we were skiing and we were in the locker room, getting ready to go, and there was this kid, and I don't know exactly what he was doing, but this adult was like yelling at him and like grabbed him by the scruff of the shirt even, and my friend spoke up. He stood up and he says, listen, buddy, I don't know why you're yelling at your kid like this, but that's not the right thing to do. And the guy says, that's not my kid. which really made
right, it even
made
worse.
my friend stand up and say, hey, you know what? Don't pick on him. Leave him alone and go about your business. And I think that's a good thing. I remember another time when I was growing up with my dad. We were in the it wasn't Montgomery Ward. It was on 56th and Sheridan Street. There was a department store there, and my dad and I were walking through this department store, and there was this gang of kids, 6, 7, 8 kids, teenagers, and they're walking through the store, and as they're walking through the store, they're taking the displays like with clothes, and they're pulling them down. I mean, like knocking over displays, and you can literally see a path of where these kids were, and they're just raising hell in this Montgomery Ward. And my dad walks up to him. He tells me to stay there because I don't even know how old I was. I was, a young teenager, or maybe a little bit younger. But he says, "Stay here," and he walks over to him, and he says, he looks at him, and he says, "Hey, you all stop that." He says, "I know you're not as stupid as you look." And he says, you don't need to be doing that. Better leave the store right now. He made a stand, and those kids just, quivered in their boots. Although there were, 8 of them, and there was a big group of them, and my dad stood up against them, and I admire that. I think there's a time for being humble. There's absolutely a time for being teachable, where none of us knows everything, and we can always learn something. Even if it's, we might be set in our ways, and we might think something is some certain way, and it turns out not to be that way. And
well, you sound like you're gargling water again. And I do remember that department store. It was Jefferson's, like the TV show, moving on up.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, that doesn't really matter. The story is really what counts. And yeah, you do have those opportunities of times where you have to step up. I remember being, like 20 years old and seeing this man beating his wife. And, I was scared because I was like, you never know when someone's in a domestic violence situation, what they'll do. But, I just started yelling and approaching towards him, and he ran away and left her on the yard. So then I called the cops, and, that I felt like I helped, but, in those situations, it's very difficult. I might have helped for the moment, but, unless you got away from him and went to a shelter or left him, that cycle of abuse tends to happen again and over.
Yeah, it's if you think about it, sin is really about yourself and thinking of no one else but yourself. And I think in a lot of ways, our world has become where we only think of ourselves, and people aren't willing to take stands like they used to. People aren't,
As you mentioned earlier, it's a very narcissistic society now. We're taking selfies all the time. We post our whole lives on Facebook, and I get guilty of that too. And I like taking selfies too. I like to embarrass my kids. So. I do too. And it's fun, and it's a fun remembrance of that day and of the time and place, and I think that's fine. We're talking a lot about what right and wrong, and I think that right and wrong is very much a gray area. What is right for one person could be wrong for another. It's subjective, and it varies from person to person. But, the only thing that we know for sure is our own experience, perspective, needs, desires, preferences, feelings, and in our own interpretations of reality. And we are an authority on this. So, our views of right and what's wrong are going to change throughout our lives. At one point in civilization, they thought the world was flat. And we all know, from
from science has allowed us to know that we live on the planet Earth and it's round. And we probably are not the only people in the universe. There are other planets. There are many other planets that are very similar to Earth, and there is possibility of life elsewhere, which hasn't been proven within a shadow of a doubt, but that we've been visited by aliens or anything crazy like that. But, that could happen. And if it does, it's going to change everything.
Can I take this back to the as far as the personal development side? So let me run down the list real quick. Okay, so we got gluttony, right? So as a personal development thing, if you're on a diet, right, or if you're trying to watch what you eat, gluttony might be your sin, right? Or if you have a food addiction, some people. Orson Welles is famous for saying gluttony is not a secret vice. Unlike some other vices that you can hide, say lust per se, you can't hide gluttony because you get fatter, unless you become a bulimic. But yeah, gluttony definitely if you're trying to moderate what you eat and put in your mouth.
Well, couldn't you have like a personal collection that's private that no one sees? Like your mom's dolls.
Yeah. If they're not familiar,
or your comic book collection.
I have a fear of dolls. In fact, Hunter looked it up. My son looked it up. I forget what he called it, but it was, there's a name. There's actual a thing about being afraid of dolls. But and if we go for
I agree with what you're saying.
For lust, I mean, if you spend all your time trying to have sex, or like our episode when we talked about pornography, if you spend all your time doing that, what's that keeping you from developing, physically and mentally? How much time do you spend obsessed over sex and not looking and trying to become the better you, the best you that you can possibly be? And not saying that you even have to be. You don't have to be the best you if you don't want to. But I think it fulfills us when we do something positive. We feel better about ourselves, and I think it helps in our relationships. It helps in our family life and our spiritual life. And these things also, they keep you from growing spiritually because you're so focused on that. In fact, from a religious perspective, I know they'll say that they'll refer to that as bondage, and not like the kinky S&M, but that you're physically you're in bondage and you're not free. You're not truly free. So I used to always have a saying to myself. I would say, you control the mind to control the body to free your soul. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind to kind of, whether it's a food addiction with gluttony, with lust, or even with anger. When you're driving, I know I have a problem. I used to never be angry. And it's funny now, this does bother me because I get road rage. And John heard that the other day. I was driving home from a new location I was working at, and it took me 2 hours and 20 minutes to get home. And I was just stuck. It was rainy, and there was no way for me to go down side streets. And I was getting angry. I was like, I wish I had a tank. I'd just mow all these cars over, and
yeah, and I told you it was good that you didn't have a tank, because then you'd make a very bad decision and people would die and you'd be in prison and our podcast would be over. Or maybe we'd be doing it. You'd be behind bars.
Behind the bars.
I'd be out here
throwing the 48
really
laws into power.
Kick in the ass.
Throwing the 48 laws of power into effect to survive.
Yeah, you'd probably you'd really be getting a swift kick in the ass then, Tom.
Yeah, I might get it more than that.
You mentioned lust, and I think that we're talking about a very basic need here, especially when we're talking about lust in as far as sexual desire. I remember back, this was a long, long time ago when I was going through a dry spell, when I was single and going through a dry spell, and how I
wait, you're married and you don't go through dry spells?
Never.
You're lying through your teeth.
My wife is loving and always, yes.
You probably got more when you were single than when you were married.
She might listen to our show. I need to cover all my bases. But back a long time ago, I was single and going through a dry spell. I remember thinking, man, I wish I would just get laid, because that way it might clear my mind. And I think that any one of these sins, there's probably a time and a place for them. We do have basic needs that need to be met. And a lot of these, greed, wanting too much of something. If you have nothing, is that so bad to want something?
Well, I think greed is taking more than what you need in order to survive. I mean, it's being greedy. It's hoarding. And I know you know a little something about that, looking at your garage.
Well, I've been doing a much better job at.
And I can't argue against that because I'm a digital hoarder. I have plenty of gigabytes and hard disk filled up with stuff that I'll never look at, never read, never watch, and I just constantly consume more.
But and you and I have talked about this before. About how some men have a provider complex. They want to provide for their families. And I know that for me, I want to have a nice full pantry full of food for my family. And I'm kind of hung up on that. I kind of get things and stock up on things when they're on sale. And, I want to make sure that my family always has food. And it's not that I'm a survivalist or anything like that or think that, the world's just going to end and we need to be prepared. But I see some value in that. And, is that greedy? Is it gluttonous? I don't know.
I think the whole survival thing, it's smart to be prepared, but there's also a very big element of fear in that. And, I know we had an episode on fear, but, a lot of those companies that sell survival supplies, that's what they market to. They market to fear. Say, hey, look, what happens if, a horde of zombies come? How are you going to survive? Or, everyone's afraid about, the big thing right now is taking away your guns. So there's aspects of terrorism, which is, an issue, but then it turns into a whole nother issue between gun control, and you start fighting a battle that's not really the right battle or not the battle of that caused a problem, So, and I don't want to get into politics, but you see that all over Facebook. I have friends that are unfriending other friends because they said something about guns, and they're like, people that have guns love their guns, man. You're not going to take them from their hands. And people that don't like guns are, think that, if we get rid of all the guns, everyone will be happy and alive. But, it's a big debate, and a lot of it's based on fear.
Yeah, and all of these, discussion points are as old as mankind. There are, and that's why we bring this to you, our listeners, because it deals with positive personal change. It deals with power and how you use it. It deals with control. It deals with, knowing the rule, knowing the laws of the rules so that you're not being played. This is all about really understanding yourself. And even though we've had some technical difficulties, I really hope that the message is clear. I know we're trying to wrap things up, Tom, but I have to say that I found an article in Psychology Today by Dr. Brian Kennard, and I had to just share it with you because it's kind of related to this, but I thought you'd get a kick out of it. The top or the name of the article is called Darth Vader: The Value of Redemptive Sacrifice. And he talks about how Darth Vader is always seen as such an evil character, but regardless of how Darth Vader appears, really what makes him so infamous is that he wasn't always evil. He fell from grace, and he was actually a man who performed countless acts of heroism.
Yeah, it's a story it's definitely a story of redemption. I love this. That's why I like Star Wars. I like Darth Vader, I mean, even though he was the villain.
I thought you'd get a kick out of this article. He was seduced and consumed by evil. I think it plays in well to what we're saying here, because the 7 deadly sins are a means to guide yourself, to take a look and see. We've talked about good versus evil, and good versus bad, and all that, and we're all different. We all have different walks of life. We all have different perspectives, and our views and our needs are all different. So, I think that this can change. I mean, these are not necessarily, there's good and bad to it, and there's always different ways to look.
But it's a good way to, I think it's a good, I like the 7 deadly sins. I think it's a good way to reflect and just kind of keep yourself in balance. Like I said, it's not based on religion. It's based on, trying to be the best possible you. So let's wrap this up, John. Oh, and I just want to have to say, how do they know what your punishment in hell is going to be? Because, with each one of these sins, I found that if you're gluttony, just for example, they say if you go to hell and gluttony was your sin, that you'll be force-fed rats, toads, and snakes. So just think about that next time you shove a Big Mac in your mouth.
Yeah, we're trying to wrap things up, and here you do.
I just had to throw it out.
Like that. You're killing me, man. Well, we'll have to do that on the next episode. I'm just going to keep my mouth closed because we'd be on here for another hour. Anyhow, enjoyed this conversation, and looking forward to more episodes of Swift Kick in the Ass.
Absolutely. And make sure to stop by swiftkickinass.com and sign up for our free membership site. Inside, you'll have free downloads. There's courses. There's action guides. There's the simple spending tool to help you get your finances in order. It's free, 100%. It's an actual membership site, and it's really cool, and we'll constantly be adding to it. So that's swiftkickinass.com.
Yeah, and please throw us an email or a note. Tell us what you think of the show, and how can we better serve you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for listening.
Until next time.
Yep. Peace.
Peace.